All right, let's talk about Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Last Olympian, because hot dang, this book. So I have not read The Last Olympian pretty much since like the year it came out, and so there was a lot I had forgotten going back into it. And it's intense. I had forgotten about how many like character deaths there are, because there's a lot of them, and especially it's like kids who are dying. So that's a little horrifying and terrifying. But also just I forgot about how complex the story was overall. I think the thing that stands out to me the most is that at the end of the book, Percy has learned from his opponent, has come to understand why his enemy, Kronos, was able to rise to power to begin with, and then attempts to force a huge fundamental change in an effort to try and prevent something like that from ever happening again. And at this point, I don't feel like I can continue to talk about this without giving away spoilers, so spoiler warning, by the way, for both Harry Potter and Percy Jackson if you have not read either of those series. Are we done with the spoiler warning? Great. So, let's dive into this, because with Percy Jackson, right, Percy sees that throughout the series, the gods have been neglecting their children. Really, they've been neglecting everybody, right? And that's part of why Kronos is able to rise to power. He's able to abuse the, sense of loneliness, the sense of abandonment that a lot of the gods' children, the demigods, feel towards their parents, and use that in order to manipulate them so that he can rise to power, right? Percy sees that, and even Percy feels that way, because he's constantly wondering, well, why didn't Poseidon claim me earlier? Why didn't Poseidon try to help me, right? He understands that. And that's why Kronos tries to tempt him, too, because like, hey, you're a child of the Big Six. Your father didn't really, care about you, right? And Percy sees that, and he says, hey, no more, right? At the end of the book, he tells the gods, you need to start claiming all of your kids, as soon as possible. Like, I think he says by the time they turn 12, you need to have claimed them so that they can be safe. And all of the gods, even the minor ones, need to have a place at the table, because throughout the series, the minor gods were constantly causing trouble for Percy because he was a child of one of the big gods, right? And so as a result, he says, look, we need to be starting treating everyone with, equality, the minor gods included. And that is a huge deal, because I feel like that sets a tone moving forward. Hey, we've actually learned something. It shows why people should be treated equally. It shows, in this series, that there is a good reason for making this fundamental change. Compare that to something like Harry Potter, wherein by the end of the books, it doesn't really feel like Harry's necessarily learned some great big lesson, right? Like, I guess love conquers all kind of thing, but it's much more just like a feel-good, like, oh, the good guys win, the bad guys lose type of situation. There isn't really a learning thing. Throughout the series, they're constantly talking about the fact that other magical species are mistreated. The centaurs, the house elves, the goblins, that they're constantly being mistreated, and we see why then those species align themselves with Voldemort, right? There's a whole thing about how Hagrid goes to try to talk to the giants, but in the end, the giants choose to side with Voldemort. And yet, despite this, there doesn't seem to be any lesson learned. It's still just like, oh, wizard supremacy, every wizards are the best, And that, to me, is why Percy Jackson sets a much different tone and is going to have a bit more lasting power than Harry Potter, simply because Percy Jackson has an actual message to send, and by the end of the series, Percy has learned a lesson and has made a huge fundamental shift in his world as a result of it. And yeah, I just think that's really cool.